Chris is going to take us through a demonstration of how we can take some data that lives in SharePoint and actually build a mobile application around that and surface this information for our staff members. So,
thank you, Phil, and thank you, James. So, wonderful introduction. It's always good to think about the innards of the platform before we actually look at things, setting a context, setting a scene, as it were. I guess what I wanted to talk about is I'm a consultant and a developer by background, so I want to talk about how we approach using OutSystems as a tool for delivering solutions to customers. So talking about business apps, talking about B2E, business to employee, or B2C, business to consumer apps. So I'm going to have a bit of a glance back at what we've traditionally done throughout the many years of working with forms and workflow solutions and SharePoint predominantly, what sort of Microsoft tools we've got in our tool shed, again, traditionally and currently, but then looking at third-party tools, and that's where we introduce OutSystems. So I'm not sure who's old enough to remember InfoPath, but I've been working with SharePoint for many years now. I first saw SharePoint back in SharePoint 2003, and that was around the year 2005. And InfoPath was a very early fledgling electronic forms tool. So we did many solutions then with SharePoint and InfoPath for data capture and essentially building an entire application sometimes within an InfoPath form set. SharePoint 2013 then brought in 2010 rather, brought in the online forms, web forms. And we used to use SharePoint Designer workflows and Nintex workflows and create basically entire business applications using what was SharePoint. So the hard part being, though, is that was all stuck within SharePoint, and it wasn't really a sort of a cloud-ready solution. This was very much like an enterprise servers in the server room kind of story. Everything was bundled into SharePoint. So back in those times, we didn't have things like Salesforce, and we didn't have to interact with tools like Office 365 or Twilio for sending SMSs or Azure. None of that existed. So InfoPath was great at the time, but it wasn't great for a future stance. So that was why InfoPath, I guess, was shelved, and we needed to look at other forms and display technologies. And so moving forward then into what we actually need in today's environment as far as modern apps. Mobile, obviously mobile, everyone's got a phone, everyone's now having to work remotely with the current climate that we're in. So making sure that staff and employees and contractors, partners and customers have an opportunity to interact with the business in a mobile sense. And that's iPhones, iPads, and laptops as well. I guess they're mobile devices, even though they're not a mobile form factor. The other consideration is how we integrate them with those cloud services and SaaS services. Again, InfoPath and that sort of old set, we could do that, but it was pretty complicated and tricky. And even then, some of the new developer tools have this as a prime sort of factor, that integration with other systems. No system's going to stand alone in today's environment. There's lots of other systems to integrate with. So standing alone, we need applications that can live outside SharePoint. Sometimes SharePoint can be just viewed as a document repository. That's where we put our PDFs and documents. And Microsoft Teams as well is now pervasive. That's in many organizations with SharePoint behind it as a document store. But from a user interface, we might want to surface an application within a Microsoft Teams tab. So we've got Teams and channels and tabs. And SharePoint, there's a whole range of now productivity tools and collaboration tools that we get in a modern workplace. As James alluded to as well, business processes, that's the reason for a lot of these applications. It's all well and good to have a nice screen and a nice user interface and works well on mobile. But if there's a business process, if there's no business process, then what's the point? We need to be able to route that data to and from other systems, to and from other people, to and from other parties within an organization. And so that's not just document approvals. That might be automatically integrating and updating a file in SharePoint, or it could be to a document store within HP Trim. There could be any number of business process that happens because of a user interaction in a screen. Having said that, of course, we want to be able to have a nice development environment for those business processes and business forms. Rapid application and low code is now sort of the new forte. Getting things to market quickly. I'll touch on something in a minute that's been brought out in a matter of days and weeks. You know, we don't have those sort of 3 and 6 month sort of development life cycles anymore, waterfall sort of style. Agile is the way we need to run things these days. So being able to MVP, a minimum viable product, get a product into the hands of employees and partners, and then iterate and then build upon that. And we're seeing that everywhere. Even Microsoft do that, Facebook do that, Salesforce do that. It sort of get something out and improve and change and move on. And we can take that pattern and that approach within our environment, within our own corporate enterprise environments. Obviously, then those rapid application development tools need to be intuitive. Developers and citizen developers, ClickDev application developers, with a bit of training, dragging and dropping and connecting things and being able to publish an application means then that the hardcore code developers can work on the deeper level integration or can just rapidly turn things out the door and get them done quicker and quicker. And obviously the solution that we build needs to be intuitive for end users. It's not just for developers, it's obviously got to be intuitive for end users. So if we think about, with that in mind, thinking about the requirements that we have for tools, these are the sort of the options. If we were to ignore all third parties, all other players, that we were just saying, right, we're just taking Microsoft tools. These are what we got today. So we could build out an application and a forms and a workflow kind of solution with SharePoint lists. We could have a number of SharePoint lists that interact with each other with lookup lists. And so that as someone picks a product, then we can pick what type it is from a type list and have a workflow behind the scenes. That still works. We can still do a solution like that. It's pretty minimal in its flexibility of user interface, and you quickly outgrow that from a functional level. So the next sort of level up, if you look left to right, is sort of small, medium, large, and extra large, is sort of from the small level of complexity and functionality and cost, is we look at then Power Apps. And Power Apps, arguably, Power Apps is a successor to InfoPath. Microsoft sort of rebuilt a forms tool to be mobile friendly, mobile ready, mobile first, and it sits on a platform service of its own right outside of SharePoint. But I suppose for the people that are using Power Apps, it starts out as an easy ClickDev solution, but once you start needing to do more complex things, it can get very, very complicated very, very quickly. There's also the paradigm of having an application lifecycle of dev, test, and prod, as well as then how you integrate the other pieces like Microsoft Flow. You've got an entirely different user interface and functional set between Flow or Power Automate now and Power Apps. And it's also the price is increasing now with Flow and premium connectors. So it's a bit of a muddy landscape with Power Apps and Flow. So we're looking now to look at other tools. Dynamics, of course, is an interesting player in the sphere. I've been doing lots of bits and pieces with Microsoft Dynamics. It's no longer CRM, but back in the day when it was SharePoint 2010 and 2013 land, Microsoft CRM was the application that we'd use for relational tables, relational databases, entities, and forms. And we can extend the platform with some custom code and custom components. There's as I've been working with CRM, I sort of say, oh, that's the old SharePoint way of doing X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot of parallels from an application standpoint. CRM is actually great, but again, there's a lot of costs, and getting applications to a mobile device can be tricky, and also then getting them to a public website, having a public portal. There's a lot of build involved and a lot of configuration and potentially a lot of cost. The last one I wanted to touch upon was the Microsoft sort of full stack developer level, where this is in the code end of things. Microsoft Azure setting up ASP.NET and C# for a full web application, or using something like Xamarin to develop mobile apps, or React.js for your reactive front end. And then, of course, microservices with things like Docker and Kubernetes. It's obviously the most flexible and extensible, but it's the most complex and most timely. And so having an enterprise application is going to take lots of time and lots of people and lots of budget. So they're the sort of players and the applications or stacks that we get within a Microsoft standpoint in today's landscape. But then introducing OutSystems, as we saw what James was talking through, OutSystems has been around. It's certainly not a new platform. It's been around for close to 20 years now, but relatively unheard of in the APAC region. So huge throughout Europe. And I've seen, developers online with 10 and 12 and 15 years experience. I guess OutSystems is probably had a strength of in enterprise probably as long as SharePoint. So if you think of how much SharePoint is being used, that's how much OutSystems is being used throughout Europe. Number of awards there, the Rapid Application Delivery Award, 4 years running from the Software Industry Association. And also then looking at Gartner, when DHCCA were looking at a partner to go ahead with for application development. Gartner's obviously someone that we listen to and talk to. And OutSystems, you'll see in the multi-experience platform is far and above off to in the leader and visionary quadrants. And similarly then with low code. So there's not many people that beat them for what we're wanting to deliver to our clients. So thinking then about the actual, just before we look at demos of what we get in the box with OutSystems, is those 4 pillars of data and interface, logic and integration. They're sort of how I sort of group them up, and the user interface developer tool actually does the same. So much like the developer level of old, where we have a 3-tier architecture, we'd have our data layer, our business layer, and our user interface layer. We can have the same sort of setup within the one tool, within the one click about area. We don't need to go to a different tool to do our database or our user interface. It's all in the one place. So from a data standpoint, I can easily create entities, much similar verbiage to with Dynamics and CRM, is that you create an entity, relationships, and our queries and filters, much like SQL or an Access database query designer. Then we can simply drag and drop those tables onto a design pane, and it automatically creates us list and detail screens. So I've never seen a rapid application development tool do this as easily. And certainly then for web and mobile, it's just simply and straightforward. So we'll see it in a minute, but you've got all your standard user interface tools like you'd expect. There's a community around OutSystems as well called the Forge, where there's third-party tools and components. We can include Google Map components. There might be other like expand and collapse accordion controls and carousel controls, much like you would see from an ecosystem, much like NPM or web development. But OutSystems is heavily supported by the community. We move on to our logic then, and of course there's business logic and functionality, if checks and loop checks, as well as then processes and timer jobs and the like. We onload and click events, event handlers, partial page loading, all the things you'd expect from a modern application you can build out using OutSystems. And then, yeah, the integration, James mentioned this also, using SOAP and REST. So there's not many systems out there that don't allow for one of those integrations, but if there was, you could write a component, register it yourself, and include that also. So the breadth of extensibility is quite large. The deployment and DevOps story is great as well, moving between the different environments. It all compiles down to .NET code in the back end, but there's some great interfaces and dashboards for managing which components are in dev and test and prod, and elevating those between the environments, and any dependencies as well, remembering there's components talking to other components and needing to make sure that we've got everything in sync and version numbers and the like. And then of course the security layer as well. We can integrate out to LDAP, Active Directory and SAML tokens, as well as then fully anonymous. So that's something that I know is hard with something like Power Apps. You can't do an anonymous application. So you'd need to look at something like Azure, but OutSystems does that straight away. So let's move on to a demo. This is what I want to show you and want to talk through. So the use case that we've got in place is an application for delivering news to the general public using a phone app. So I have a SharePoint list where I have my title and detail and a blurb of a news article, and I'm going to be surfacing that up to a mobile device. So this is SharePoint to a mobile device. And I'm going to be doing it as an anonymous app, so anyone can use that. Now, if anyone has worked with SharePoint, getting SharePoint and anonymous to work together is always a bit tricky. But I'll show you how easy it is to do within OutSystems. So it's news and updates from an organisation out to their customers or to the general public about the pandemic and social distancing and everything. Quite interesting. There was an app that was released by the federal government as well. Very similar in some respects. This was put out only a couple of days ago. They've got a new application where it's a news and media app. So much the same as what I'm going to be promoting. There was one from Microsoft as well, a pattern that they'd prepared for using Power Apps and Flow and Microsoft Teams as well. But you're more than welcome to search that out yourself and have a look at that and integrate that into your own environment, and then come and see how easy it is to do in OutSystems. So there we go, SharePoint list data and a mobile app that's going to be anonymous. So let's have a look at that demo. Let's go and do that. All right, so here I am in OutSystems, and this is the sort of new project screen. I'm going to select to add a new application, and it will ask me what type of application. Obviously, I've got a reactive web app application, or a tablet or a phone app. There's other templates as well that can be installed from the Forge. So we've got our Silk UI templates where dark colors, and it'll include a bunch of different themed components that we can drag and drop easily and make them look in a really nice templated sense. We could also create a service like a particular integration piece, a traditional web app as well. But for the moment, we'll just choose phone app. And what that will be is where we build out our application logic. So I'm going to give it a name, and it will be information for people about pandemic. We can do anything we want really in the title. I might put some spaces in there. I'll just do information about the pandemic, and a description as well if I like. I can give it a general theme, and this will start to sort of, it'll style up sort of a range of colors within the application. I'll give it a sort of I'll give it the crimson sort of color, and then I can upload an icon as well. And I've got this little comms icon here, which I'll use just as sort of and you'll see that throughout as we go. So I'm going to create an app now. What that will be, much like in Visual Studio, I'm creating a project that I can then add a module to. So at the moment, I just have an empty project. I need to then add my module, which is my phone app module. So if I click create module, that'll take a second to set up the skeleton framework and put me into the designer as well now for OutSystems. And we can start to do some of the integration with SharePoint and build out our user interface as well. So you'll see up the top here, we've got our processes, interface, logic, and data. They're our 4 pieces of the platform that we can use to build. Predominantly, we're going to be looking at the interface, but here I just need to drag and drop a screen onto my design canvas. Now, OutSystems will ask me, what sort of screen do I want? There's a number of different template screens that I could use, including different carousels and the like, including a chart in a screen, and you can just add these on and then set up the data sources for those. We're just going to do an empty screen as well, and I'll just call it home and create a screen. And we get a mobile screen then that we can add our elements to. So what we need to do is set up our integration to SharePoint. So I have a SharePoint component that I've created that has the REST calls and integration into that. So I need to add
come here, please.
I need to add a dependency to that component. So you'll see here, these are a list of all the different components that I have in my tenant, my environment. Some of these have come from the Forge, our user interface, our community environment. Some of these are ones that I've worked on. There's the Dublin theme charts. Footy tipping, that was one that I was working on just as a demo and example. But I'm going to add my SharePoint REST API integration, and it shows me then the methods that are in there. So I've got my news, get news, and I'll add the get one item as well. We might not get time to do a single load item, but we'll do our news list. And it pulls in a different set of structures as well. So this is the data structures that correlate to those SharePoint REST calls. So if I click apply, it will pull those references into my project. And if I have a look at data now, I'll have under the structures environment here under SharePoint REST, I've got this D3. These are all my SharePoint lists, fields and columns from my SharePoint list, and I'll use those to paint out my screen. If I go back to my interface, because what I need to do now is I need to set up the load of data into this screen. We might just give it a title first of all. We'll give it a title and say news and press releases. Oh, it's a bit too wide, so news / press, something like that. And I'll go to my little search bar here and I'll put an image here. So I'm going to put an image placeholder into my header. So if I drag and drop my header there, it will ask me what sort of image do I want, and I can choose from my import image control, and I've got a little banner image here that I can use. Okay, so this is going to be included in my mobile app. So now I need to, as part of my screen, is I've just right click there and I want to fetch data from other sources, and I'm going to fetch my SharePoint data into this application. So this is now essentially an onload method, and I'll call it as such, onload, and I'm going to run a server action here. And this is essentially like I'm coding now. I'm developing up what I need to happen in the onload. Drag and drop there, and I just need to click upon my SharePoint get news entry there, and that will go off to the REST endpoint and query SharePoint and return that information. The other thing I need to do is this onload method actually returns an output parameter called out1, and I need to set that as, instead of being text, I need to set it to my structure here, which is my get news response. So that's a structure which will be a collection of news items. And so what I need to do is take this output from my news and put that to that variable. So I need to do an assign here, and I need to assign my output variable for this load method, and I need to set that is coming from my data that's come from SharePoint. So here we go, I've got my little SharePoint icon. I want the output of that. So it's essentially tying the two together. So my onload code method, if you will, click code, is to call a REST endpoint and then output the results of that to whatever is calling it. If I look back now at my screen here, I can now add in my interface to actually display that data. So to do that, I need to add a list control. So I'm going to add my list control here into my, I can't drag it into the header, but I can drag it into the contents. And I need to set the source of that list control to be those results. So there we go. So now I need to, this is just a container control to show a list, but I need to have a list item content, which will be then a display of what each row will be. Within each row then, I'm going to set up an image on the side and then the title and the content from my SharePoint list. So I'm going to choose an icon component here, and I'll put my icon on the left here. And OutSystems asks me what sort of icon do I want to use. News. I'm just going to use that newspaper here. Now I might want to change the color of that icon. Let's say under styles here, the color, let's make that sort of a, hasn't colored it properly. This, I did the wrong color, that's why. There we go, make it a sort of a charcoaly or a darker blue. And then what I need to do is put those fields into the title and content. Now I need an expression control here, which means I can pull data from anywhere. In my expression, I'm going to say that my output is going to include, from the current row, I want to include the title. So that's all I really need to do there for the title. And then for content here, I'm going to do another expression field here. And I'm going to put, there's a field in my SharePoint list called current, called blurb. Now I'll show you the SharePoint list in a moment, just so that we can see what we've got. But that's pretty much it. I'm almost ready to give this a test run. I will do one other thing just to show you real quick, is that we have a great utility in OutSystems called the widget tree. Each of these components is called a widget. So I've got my image, I've got my list, I've got my list content. Sometimes it's hard to find each component. So I can look at a widget tree here, and I can easily expand each of the nodes and each of the elements, and then find the attributes and the properties of those. So if I go to list group, there's my, where I set the list results. What I want to do is I'm going to wrap this in a container, essentially like putting it in a div. And the reason to do that is because for each row then, I want to give it some space at the bottom. So I'll give it 20 pixel gap. Oops. Now that's a container around the whole group. I'm going to undo, Control Z. And I want to instead do a container around each item, enclosing container. And then I can put, say, 20 pixels below it. So that's going to give me a nice spacing between each entry. They're not going to be all bunched up. But that's really it. That's really it. And so if we have a look over at our SharePoint list here, here's our company news SharePoint list. So I have a title and a blurb and some details in HTML. So I'm just going to add another one here just so that we can show news in Australia. And then the blurb for that will be, please check ABC News for updates. Something like that, just to add a new entry to my SharePoint list. And that's in there. So now all I need to do now is to test this application is I've got a big green tick at the bottom here. This is a one-click publish. Now, OutSystem has a great compile as you go setup. If, for instance, I was to choose, again, my widget tree, choose my list here, if I was to take out this as the source, so essentially I've created an error. I can't now deploy this, and my one-click publish is now in error state. So the source must be set, quickly and easily takes me to where I need to fix my error, and I can now one-click publish. So it's actually really quite straightforward, and that'll then change from the one-click green icon to a blue open in browser icon. So what we've been able to see here is I've been able to add a SharePoint hook for our REST call. That's using a OAuth token in order to authenticate against SharePoint. But from the developer endpoint, for the app endpoint, all I've really needed to do is include a reference, and then it's just retrieving a list of items. I've got a few chat messages there. I don't know if I need to check on those. We'll hold the questions until the end unless there's any troubles. But let's have a look at what this is producing now. If I hit the green open in browser icon now, that's opening up my preview, and I'll be able to see those entries. This is in our sort of demo set, and there we go. There's our please check ABC News for updates. So that's great. We've been able to do an application and run it in a emulator. But what I want to do now is actually have that running in a mobile device. So let's set that up. Under module here now, I need to generate mobile app. Now this is where we can define up what we want to do for the application, and we want to distribute it. We can build and compile it out to an iOS app and put it into the App Store, or generate an Android app as well for Google Play. But what I'm going to show you here is a progressive web app. Now, progressive web apps is a fairly new feature within OutSystems. It's only been in there for 6 to 12 months now, but it gives you the ability to have a run on your phone app that you don't need to download and install an app. So that's great, and that's what we want to try. So I'm going to switch over now to my mobile phone, and I will show you this momentarily. I'm going to mirror my this is my real phone, onto the desktop here, and using Air Server. So Air Server is a great application that you can install on your local computer, and then I just need to do a screen share mirror from my phone to my computer. So if I go scan, and you'll see my computer desktop here, I'm going to scan on that barcode, and that's going to take me to my app. So here we are, we're running our emulator again. Oh, and I have an issue now because I wanted to run this as a mobile app. Sorry, anonymous app. So it's asking me to log in. So I need to make some changes now to my application in order for people to be able to see this anonymously. So let's now go back to OutSystems. And if I go back to my page here, I'm going to click on the actual page, and anonymous here, I'm just going to tick on anonymous. That's all I need to do for this particular form. And if it was registered, I would need to log in again from my phone. I'd need to log in using my credentials, username and password that was set, or if I was integrating to Active Directory or whatever. But that's all I need to do. So I'm going to run up that app now, and I'll go back to my mobile phone now. So you'll notice now it's been updated to the latest version. It will still be connecting over to SharePoint. We haven't changed anything there. But if I go back to my my phone now, and I'm going to scan that code again. All right, so now let's see what happens. It's loading up. Here we go. Okay, so that's loaded up anonymously. Now, this is just in the scan application device. So I'm going to actually take a copy of this URL, and I'm going to put that into Safari, and then I'm going to save that as a link to my home page. So paste, go. So this is now opening up the mobile app, and if I go add to home screen, that's created me an icon here right next to the government app. So let me just close a few things, and we'll show you what's going on. All right, so if I open up this app now from my desktop, this is now anonymously showing data from SharePoint in a mobile app, quickly and easily, and there we go. Now, if I was to add a new item to SharePoint and try and refresh, nothing's going to happen at the moment. So I need to include a refresh capability within this app. So in order to do that, what I need to do is, again, go back to my widget tree, and in my content here, the container for common layout, I need to say use pull to refresh on this layout is to true. My event handler then, so when I actually do a pull to refresh, I want to do a new client action. And what I want to do then is to refresh my data, and I want to refresh my onload data. So if I click OK to that and publish that up, and then I should be able to, within my phone, be able to easily update my list of news items within the page just by simply a pull down refresh. So let me close up. This is in my Air Server. So I'm going to open up the app, and it will show me that your app has automatically been updated. So let me add an entry into SharePoint again. So I'll just put my phone down one moment. So if I go back to news here, and I go another entry, say, please be aware of social distancing, go for a walk or bike ride, but only with your family, something like that. And okay, so I've added a new SharePoint item. So that's a list item I've added to SharePoint. I'll go back to my phone, and all I need to do, if the demo gods are kind to me, is if I pull down on my phone and let go, there we go. Please be aware of social distancing. So I've been able to show how easy it is to set up a interaction with, or integration rather, with SharePoint and an anonymous user, and the generation of a mobile app. And this is an iPhone, standard iPhone X, and I've just quickly and easily, grabbing information from SharePoint. It's fairly quick too, which is impressive. Realistically, it's the backend server that's making the call to SharePoint and returning those results. But that's sort of where I wanted to show what I wanted to show you as the power of OutSystems. If I return back to my slides, I will find that PowerPoint is not responding. What's happening? I've killed PowerPoint. Maybe I'll kill off my air server.
There was a couple of questions that might be handy to handle at this point that I can see, unless you're getting questions. Have you got questions privately there, Chris, as well?
I've got questions that have come through to the Zoom chat. I can bring it across here, or I can answer them.
Well, there's some questions about licensing and SQL, those sorts of things, which I'll leave for James to have a chat to us about. But there was some things about, could you bring through your own template and use your own template, which is probably, and was there, and how does it connect to SharePoint? Well, you did demonstrate that after the question was asked. So
yeah, exactly.
But perhaps you want to talk a little bit about where you might see that, and then we'll move on. We're just approaching the 1 hour mark. We have kept everyone here, or booked 90 minutes with people. I think we're running well on time. We've got a bit of time up our sleeve. So if you want to handle those two questions.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'll show quite quickly the template story. Is that there's templates that are available in the Forge here, which is the community and corporate application sort of componentry that you can pull in. So there's a number of those here that are provided that you can make use of. We could easily set up one of those templates, like a company template, and have that as your own template. The Silk UI one is a good example. This is one that OutSystems have provided. And this Silk UI web, there's a Silk UI mobile as well. And I just need to simply, there's this installed would be an install button, and that installs it to my tenant, and then I can use it in my OutSystems development. If I was to look at Silk UI OutSystems here, this is their templating sort of example page, and you can have a look at, there's a number of demo pages for the different components. Here we go, templates. There's a couple mobile templates and web templates. If we were to look at the mobile templates, because that's what we're looking at now, there's a customer app template and an employee app template. Preview those, and you can customize the layout and look and feel. And the preview actually shows you in a UI demo, much like I was showing. So this is an OutSystems generated one. I could again point my phone at this QR code and try it out on my local phone device to see how it works and how it operates. This is just a sort of a sample one. I think it's got some fairly rich interactions and engagements, but certainly if a company had a corporate theme and a corporate layout that you wanted to use, then yeah, we could design that and define that and have that as a module that you include. So you saw this is like that sort of first time you run an application, you scan through, finger swipe, get started, username and password, log in, and no need to log in again. We put in a PIN code. This is all fictitious, obviously. And here we go. So this is an app that's been generated in OutSystems, much like I was sort of showing. Is we've got our news, company news, high-level news. So this is almost like an intranet in a phone, using like a phone directory as well. There's many organisations are constantly saying, "Can I have a phone app directory? How do I get to someone?" And that's not clicking through. That's just hello world level. I could register, these might be my company apps. So I could have my vacations apps, see how much request I've got, and the ability to put in a, from here to here, I want to enjoy these days, and submit. So this is essentially choose a start date and an end date and send a request. So this is a mobile friendly leave request form. I can look at number of events. So this is a template that you can just take and use. We've got our company meeting. Are you going? Maybe. We've got a work lunch. Yeah, I'll go to a work lunch. So these are sort of things that you can respond to. And then you've got your own profile as well. You can set up your own photo, your personal details. Obviously, there's a bit of integration back to another system to get this properly working within your own organization. But this is a template that you can just take and use from from OutSystems. They provided you this. So that's the employee.
Chris, I'll just elaborate on that a little bit if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead.
So those templates are provided by OutSystems and they give you a really good starting point. You can also build your own custom templates, and essentially what they are, they're built up from HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you wanted to write your own custom CSS or build your own style sheets, you can definitely do that in the platform, either starting from scratch and building it up that way, or taking one of these templates that we provide out of the box and customizing them as well. And yeah, you can customize everything about the application just like you would if you were writing bespoke HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and even .NET as well. So we provide accelerators over the top, but underneath that's the technology the platform is built on, and you've got access to go and customize that however you want for branding purposes or for business logic.
So yeah, so if a company had a company theme, much like within SharePoint how we theme out intranet, we can set up, you can do your own template here, and I'm going to do something absolutely horrible, and you'd just be able to download this fonting and whatever else, set up a background image and just copy that to clipboard, and then I use that in my theme within my application. So quite easily, if you've got a style guide within an organization, not many companies don't have a style guide, and I often experience that when branding and configuring up for SharePoint and Office 365 for theming. You've got a primary color and a secondary color and a background color. They're the main themings that you can do. And an image, you could upload your own image as well there. If you've got a corporate image, upload one of those and then save out that CSS and it'll pull that into your application. Then you just use it whenever you need to. And there's all these other template palettes. So this is the mobile customizer. There's an equivalency then also for the web application as well. Do a live preview of whatever styles you've done, scan that with your phone and try it out on a device, tablet as well. So you get a lot. There's a lot that you get above and beyond just sort of the design of the application. So then it's up to how do you click and how do you design up the functionality for your particular application or your particular integration as well. So yeah, so that's sort of where I wanted to show. I don't think I had a slide after that, and I've had.
That's all right, Chris. There is one more question that might be particularly relevant to you, or maybe James can also augment. With SharePoint connecting, if we develop a public application, can we specify a nominated account for connection, or is it user-based, like using the app at the time of connection?
Okay, great question. Okay, so how I've set this up is within SharePoint is I've added a application principal. So there's an app-only registration that is sort of a headless person service account, if you will. And within my get a token, that's how I'm using that. So at the moment, I'm just doing it for a single, because I want to do it anonymously. The anonymous app will call to OutSystems, and OutSystems will connect to SharePoint as a particular user, if you will. There is ways that we can take current logged on user and pass that through. But in this instance, we're just using an app-only registration. So
with the APIs, when we're connecting to endpoints, you can configure any kind of custom authentication. So it might be an API key that just authenticates for the application itself and retrieves information as a generic user. Or you can also build OAuth flows into your integrations as well to authenticate on behalf of a specific user to retrieve content that's just for them as well. And that's the same for any integration that we build. You've got full control over whatever authentication method you want to use.
Yeah, this one I'm using is just essentially a application at tenant, and then I've granted permissions to that application. So it's while it's anonymous in its delivery, it's using SharePoint and Azure apps and all that sort of stuff. So without getting too technical, but yeah, as James mentioned, we can make use of current logged on user or a shared user,
And thank you, Chris, for the great demo. It's pretty cool to be able to actually build a mobile application in front of you live and connect it to an integration point. It's a great platform for doing demonstrations on.
The other one, sorry to jump in, is being able to do it anonymously. That's the thing that excited me. We couldn't do that demonstration with Power Apps. It'd be really, really hard. And even InfoPath, we could never do anonymous InfoPath forms. So what I've showed was really the realm of ASP.NET and Azure.
Yeah, that's right. You've really got the flexibility of custom development with the speed and power of something like Power Apps.
So once again, thank you for coming along this morning. Thank you to the presenters, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Please forward us any questions and we'll connect you to the right answers. Thank you. Good morning.